Welcome to the MGH brain-PBM clinic rounds. Today is January 10th, 2025. It's my great pleasure to invite Dr. Josh Hagen, who is the director of the Human Performance Collaborative at Ohio State University, as well as Ms. Margaret Hollander, who is a clinical research manager at Ohio State. Thank you so much, Josh and Margaret, for being here today. Please take it away.
Awesome. I just want to make sure you guys can see my slides, hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Seeing here.
Awesome. James, good to see you. You like my background?
Yeah.
That's real, by the way.
An overthrow behind you. Oh, well done. You have to turn it on, of course.
It's real.
Yes.
I'll turn it on so I can heal my eyes.
Okay.
All right. Awesome. Yeah, appreciate it. Really enjoyed all the conversations we've had with James and Paulo and his whole group over the last 6 months, 12 months, probably even longer than that. This may be a little bit slightly out of the norm of what you guys may talk about before, but it is photobiomodulation based, recovery based. But what I want to do is introduce you a little bit to our laboratory we have at Ohio State and with the Department of Defense, with the Air Force, and just kind of show you where we're going, a little bit bigger picture on all things that we term recovery science. And then we'll get into some specifics of some work that we did with assessment of different photobiomodulation tools that we worked with James's team quite a bit on, and really psyched about that collaboration. Came out really well. And then we'll talk, we have a legitimate clinical trial going on right now with an Novathor and another device as well, that we'll kind of walk you through the design. We're about halfway through data collection in that one. All right. So the Human Performance Collaborative at Ohio State. So I'm the faculty director there, and also a professor in integrated systems engineering. But really the idea behind this is typically academia is a little bit stovepiped, as I think we're all aware. We definitely collaborate, but it is more traditional route is professor, grad student, student research, collaborate a little bit, some more than others. What Ohio State tried to do a few years ago is under this idea of human performance, create this collaborative where part of my job as a faculty director is just to introduce, we have brilliant researchers and great grad students, introduce them to each other and come up, center around this concept of performance and how can we do really fun multidisciplinary projects, go after bigger grants, bigger funding, but just work together on performance. And part of our job was to find what performance means. And our take on that is every single human being on the planet can optimize their performance to some degree. Some of the players that we'll see on the football field tonight in Dallas, they're at 95, 98, 99% optimization. We try to get them to 99.5%. But when we start thinking about people like me, people like disease patients, that's when that really changes. But a lot of the tools that we use, and you guys are, I think PBM is one of the most exciting ones, is it has such broad implications, both clinically, for acute performance, for chronic performance, for health and wellness. That's kind of what we're about, is in general with the collaborative. And then we've wanted to introduce you a little bit to our recovery science portfolio and research that is emerging and that Margaret and I are working on quite a bit to build up. And this has been a passion area of mine for about a decade, but to actually be able to build a team and build some clinical trials and applied trials is super exciting. We're going to be pushing hard and fast on this year. So this is the RIP team, Recovery Innovation Project team that we're coming up with. It's a combination of Department of Defense, academia, collegiate professional athletics, just to share information. And I'll provide you guys some more information as this gets a little bit more solidified. But really what we want to do is bring to the forefront recovery science and intervention, human subjects research and applied development, and really kind of center that, because there's a lot of exciting appetite for these things these days, especially in what I'll call the high performance side of things and athletics and the Department of Defense, but we have a long way to go. So kind of the state of things. I've been at this. I'm an engineer by background, so I'm a little bit more into measurements and data science and physiological monitoring. But very quickly when we got into measuring special operators and athletes with wearable devices and physiological monitors, it was very quick into what are we going to do with this information? Like, what does it actually mean? How can we potentially think about optimizing performance? And again, from that, like high performing athletics and military space, it was very clear to us early on that recovery is going to be the one thing that we can probably have the most control over anything, because they train exceptionally hard physically. They're mentally challenged immensely. And again, every population has different levels of those. Like we call that allostatic load of just all of the stressors in, on, and around the body. But as that adds up, then that's where inflammation, oxidative stress, poor health and wellness, metabolic issues, like all of that really centers around kind of that stress mechanism. So what we try to do kind of philosophically at the HBC is how can we quantify allostatic load as much as possible? And then how do we out recover that allostatic load? We're pretty good at it these days on the purely physical perspective, but that doesn't give you nearly the whole picture. So we've got thousands of sensors on our athletes, GPS devices, heart rate monitors, sleep devices, everything. So we're quantifying quite a bit. We understand a little bit more how to physically recover them, heat and cold and rest, sleep, and all that kind of stuff. We've completely ignored. I think we got a hot mic, guys. We've completely ignored the kind of mental health domain and emotional stress domain. So we're trying to get better at quantifying that and recovering from that. But just to give you guys an idea of like these infographics, a little bit hard to read, but this is kind of where we saw wearable technologies 10 years ago, where it was just like 2014, 2015, it was emerging. And now we all have very easily obtainable wearable devices, and we're quantifying physiology in actually a pretty decent way these days. We're starting to see that same thing happen in technology for recovery science. So I'm sure it's in your algorithms too, if you just like new devices popping up every day for whatever thing to heal whatever thing. But we can definitely see innovation happening in the recovery space. PBM is certainly a prime indicator of that, but there's lots of others as well. So now customers are asking us those same questions they asked us about wearables, is like, how accurate is this heart rate monitor? They're asking us that about interventions, and like how, like I get hit up like daily about some new light therapy device and like some new blanket or some new something, and like, hey, how well does this thing work? So we all know that's a much tougher question to answer, and we don't have the answers to all those, but at least I wanted everybody to kind of be aware of the demand signal coming from the consumer space. And all of this is, I think, pretty massive, and I think it's only going to grow. And again, it's from that, like, okay, now we can quantify sleep and recovery and stress to some degree. What are we going to do about it? How do we make some sort of decisions? And that's what we're really excited about. And then a really nice paper that came out of Kelman's group last year. It was a 9-year effort out of country Germany, funded quite a bit of it, but I thought there were some nice takeaways from it of this is a very individual thing. So interventions, like whenever we design studies as scientists, like everybody on the screen, like we are doing lots of subjects and we're quantifying lots of things, and we're trying to see, like, do these things work at a statistical level from a group level, which is critically important. But I think what's also very important is to know that everybody has a different individual response to these things. And like our vision and our hope is now that we've got some pretty trusted physiological monitoring tools that are very scalable, and now we have lots of different interventions. Can we get ourselves to a place where we can get more prescriptive about these things and say, like, hey, you need, based on your data today and how you feel subjectively and objectively, these are the types of interventions you should. So maybe it's meditation or breath work or something like that. It could be lots of different things, but that's kind of our holy grail of where we're trying to go. And I think we're getting there. It is a pie in the sky idea, but that's just philosophically kind of where we're looking to go. And kind of how we see things on the recovery landscape is on the left-hand side of this are like very, very emerging things that I'm super excited about. On the right-hand side are probably more, even though I've got PBM in that, they're a little bit more established and have been studied, like some of these for decades. When you look at all the different literature, and there's lots of different ways that these are going to affect, but we kind of break it into to some degree, and there's crossover for sure. But we got physical recovery tools, and then we've got these other like holistic type recovery tools. And really our objective at Ohio State and at the Air Force labs that both Margaret and I work at is to try to get better. But I mean, there's so much out there now, but now to really understand what's happening physiologically and subjectively using all of these different interventions and try to create some quicker answers and keep up with the pace a little bit with the innovation of some of these things that are going on. But our job is to get information to our end users and try to, again, as they hit us up of like, here's this new thing, how well does it work? How do we quickly like give a quick thumbs up or thumbs down of like, hey, we should look into this more, this is promising, or we've got concerns because of these different reasons. So that's kind of where some of this stuff lies. And maybe I'll just introduce a little bit on the left-hand side, because we're going to have a lot of studies going on in the next couple of years here. And this is really to start addressing some of the more cognitive, emotional, mental recovery side of things that I think we largely ignore. But anybody that's done meditation, mindfulness, breathwork practices, like, to me, we're calling them sensory enhanced mindfulness practices, but it is really a way to engage more in the practice of mindfulness and meditation that hundreds of years of effectiveness, like, we know how amazing those things are. But now these are ways that, like, there's one way with sensory deprivation with our float therapy tanks, with our wet float and dry float tanks that are taking environmental stimuli away from you to help you get to a deeper relaxative state. Other very emerging things here in the middle with vibroacoustic therapies, where now it's a cocoon or a bed or a chair that you're sitting in that applies very thoughtful design in vibration therapy, different frequencies and different intensities to different parts of the body to kind of get you into different either parasympathetically activated states or sympathetically activated states if you want to upregulate one or the other. So those are just some fun things I kind of wanted to just introduce the group to, and say like, hey, this stuff's emerging if you haven't already seen some of this. And then the last thing I'll hit before we'll talk more specifically about photobiomodulation is, again, on this landscape of you can see all those modalities that we have. And if anybody wanted to do a power analysis of how do we know how well this works against these other 12, we'll never get finished with that study. So what we try to do is blend a lot of different things together. So on the right-hand side is the lab that Margaret and I run out of both Ohio State and Air Force Research Labs, where we can do what we call like high fidelity clinical style human subjects designs. And that's where we can control as many variables as possible. We can do lots of blood biomarker analysis, lots of physiology, lots of subjective data, some longer questionnaires. Obviously, there's some things that are going to take a lot more time for participants, but that's where we have maximum control, and we have access to active duty military, general populations, but also students at Ohio State, ROTC, other places like that where we could actually recruit and do more traditional lab type things. But then what's, I think, equally important are these other layers that we've got on the left-hand side. So this, what we call high volume applied type study. And this is where we've got really awesome relationships, especially with Ohio State athletics, but even other teams as well. Like, we've got 1,000 athletes in 36 sports at Ohio State. And they were the first place I introduced a float tank to 10 years ago. And now we've got 5 of them across campus. And we're getting ready to publish a paper that just looked at subjective data and sleep and recovery data on athletes. It just happened under normal standard operating procedures of over 3,000 float sessions that happened, because we're integrated with the sports science department, and these things are just already happening. So in that case, we're not doing a placebo or control or a sham trial. This is just what's happening in athletes, but being able to do that 3,000 floats over close to 1,000 different athletes that would take us forever to do that if we were to control, like actually design that study, but this is stuff that's already happening. So we try to leverage a lot of that. Obviously, we don't have tons of control. We don't have blood. We don't have other things, but that's kind of how we balance those two things together. And then the middle is where it gets super exciting, where we've actually introduced the athletic department. It took us 10 years to get there. We introduced them to the idea of a placebo and a sham, and said, like, hey, if they come to us with a question like, how well does this work in our athletes? We say, like, okay, you can go the cheap and easy route, and I'm going to be able to tell you, like, maybe with 30% certainty that it works. Or we can design a study where we get a little bit more data, we have a control condition, we're more thoughtful about it, and we can get a lot closer to telling you how this works in your athletes. And every time we've done that, they've said, yeah, we want to do that version. So it took us a while to do that, but that's kind of where we're at. And similar with we got a partnership with the U.S. Soccer Federation, where we're doing these controlled trials in soccer athletes at Ohio State, translating that data to U.S. Soccer, where they're financially supporting a lot of that. So that's just an idea of a background of some of the recovery work that we have going on. Obviously, PBM is very high in our priority list, and we're going to be we're doing active studies now, and we're going to be doing more, I think, for the next hopefully 3, 4, 5 years in it. But we'll kind of shift gears a little bit and just talk. Obviously, you guys know all of this stuff, but what got us really interested in PBM probably 4 or 5 years ago is really some of the data that came out a little bit more on the physical performance side of things. But obviously, the innovation that's happening in the technology space was super interesting as well. So what we see as our demand signal coming from our end users is, and this is again speaking like military on the special operations side primarily, and a lot of our partners in athletics, they start buying a lot of these things and they start calling us up and saying, like, giving us the anecdotes and the stories that I love. Obviously, they're not scientific, but like, hey, we're seeing this in our or everybody's feeling better after doing this thing. And what I could say, what got me very intrigued about PBM in particular, was a couple of special forces units that were buying several of these, and they kept buying them because they were just booked all the time. Like they were just in use all day, every day. And to me, that's a big, like, these are the types of people that will not do anything that they don't think works. And it's kind of up to them to what they do. So while there's no data and no science behind it, the fact that it's intensely utilized and they keep buying more and more of them, to the point now where they put some of these in their command centers, to where, like, if they're 12 hours working behind, closed doors and screens and things like that, they still wanted access to this. So they put them in those locations. So that helps us say, like, hey, we need to get a lot more, we need to start targeting some designs around just understanding a little bit more of what's going on in these specifically whole body PBM treatments. So that's what got us really excited. And then I think it's the dozens and dozens of papers out there. And this is, again, I know you guys are more neurally focused. We kind of started more physically, but now we're getting a little bit more holistic with it, with the design that Margaret will explain here in a second. But some, like, this is the paper I like to, or the types of papers I like to show when we talk to our athletics groups. And there's tons and tons of these papers, and you guys are all very familiar with them, I'm sure, but it's really showing the ability of this preconditioning treatment of photobiomodulation for acute physical performance enhancement and accelerated recovery. So as we start looking at these and start talking to our customers, which again are primarily special operators and athletes, like, it is very clear to us that there's some pretty intriguing benefits to preconditioning. So 20-minute whole body photobiomodulation session. Obviously, these papers were not whole body related because they were older, but the same mechanisms hold true. And being able to do this before hard training, hard practice, be able to have some instant or very rapid strength increases and performance increases, but also that the difference in muscle damage markers 12, 24, 48, 72 hours after doing those very intense events is pretty key to us. And then as we started getting these beds into our different athletics teams, then we got, again, more stories of these athletes saying, like, I have to do this before every game. I have to do this before every practice. And now it's just part of their nature. And again, these are people that can choose to do whatever they want. So just want to point that out. But very excited to talk to you guys and to get some questions and hear more. But I'm going to turn it over to Margaret here, who's going to talk about two things: our validation studies that we have going on, and then also our design for our clinical trial. So Margaret, I'll let you go ahead and take the screen.
Okay, let's see. Pop that up over there. Alrighty, you able to see what I'm sharing?
We are.
I gotcha.
Perfect. So we kind of like to think about our recovery research as 3 steps. The first part of that is selecting which devices we want to use. So like Josh was saying, it's kind of that demand signal, what people are asking about, what people are already utilizing or hoping to utilize. Our next part of step 1 is validating those devices. So when we buy these devices or get these devices, we want to validate what the manufacturers are saying about them. Sometimes that's as easy as taking a thermometer and putting that in a cold plunge and saying, yep, indeed, that is 38 degrees. Sometimes it's a little bit more complicated, like photobiomodulation, where I spent the last year of my life learning light physics to be able to validate those devices. The next step of recovery research, step 2, is validating those modalities. So like photobiomodulation, this is where we bring it into our clinical trials stage. Now that we know that the devices are doing what they say they're doing, what do they do when we apply this to the person, to a human subject? And then the last step, Josh touched on this a little bit. Let's make these into prescriptive recommendations because everybody's going to be different in what you like and what works for you. So after we know kind of the mechanisms behind these devices, can we make a plan for you that's going to be most beneficial? So let's talk about that step one, the device validation. In terms of photobiomodulation, we put this into 3 different categories: whole body devices, so that's kind of those tanning bed looking devices; panel-based devices, that's your Juve, your Platinum. You'll probably see a lot of advertisements for those. It's generally just a panel with LEDs facing one direction. And then wearable devices, this is a huge category. It can be everything from blankets, sleeping bags, something you wrap around your knee, a small laser targeted device, various things. But we separated it into these 3 because we thought our recommendations for validation could be best prescribed to researchers in 3 different ways. So when we went to validate our full body PBM devices, we wanted to come up with some questions that we wanted answered by the end of the validation. And our big ticket questions were, what are the wavelengths produced by the devices? You know, they're saying they're producing 660 nanometers, 1050 nanometers. Is that indeed what's coming from these devices? Especially with some of the lesser known companies, are they actually producing what they're saying they're producing? And then what does a radiance look like in various degrees and factors with these devices? So when we talk about irradiance, we're saying milliwatts per centimeter squared. That's kind of how we think about the dosage of the device. So it's the number of photons hitting a known space. So we'll go into that a little bit more. And then with the various devices, we do have different recommendations. So first thing we had to do is figure out how we were actually going to get these measurements. We went through a very long, arduous process to figure out what was going to work best. When we were looking into the literature, most researchers are relying on what the manufacturers are reporting to say what sort of dosage their participants are getting. Now, we don't believe the manufacturers are purposefully publishing false information about their devices. There's just no reliable or consistent method across manufacturers and across papers for what that irradiance measurement is. So if you tell me you got 30 milliwatts per centimeter squared, that's going to be extremely different from if you measured it with a thermopile sensor that's going to focus mainly on temperature versus a spectroradiometer, which is going to focus on photons and wavelengths. So we decided to go with the spectroradiometer. It is the one that Novathor uses, and they were lovely enough to lend to us so we could do our experiments. And we found that that was the best device that we could use. There's various companies that produce these devices, but they allow you to find the wavelengths of the devices and then the irradiance values produced by those specific wavelengths. So some of our devices have 1 or 2 wavelengths, some of them have 4 or 5. So I want to know when you're getting treatment, how much of that is coming from the infrared range and how much of that is coming from the red range. Should future research tell us that one is more beneficial than the other, we would be able to look back on these devices and figure out what we would want to use from there. So in application, here's just some of the data we've gotten with the full body beds we had access to. We had the Novathor, the Arc LED, and the Theralite. This is 3 different companies. So when we're looking at the spectral measurements, or the actual wavelengths being produced by the devices, it's pretty close to what the manufacturers are saying. With any of our devices, we didn't see huge differences here. You might see a little bit of a difference, but that's because I'm measuring those peaks. It's still capturing those other wavelengths within that arc window. Then actually going on to irradiance, which is the next thing we want to validate, what sort of dosage is coming out of that device. We wanted to look at, was it different shoulder to shoulder, head to toe? Are you going to get more treatment on your chest versus your legs? So the way we measured that was by taking these sensors attached to the spectroradiometer and moving at set intervals across the device, shoulder to shoulder, head to toe, and up and down through the device to see how that varied. So you can see on that graph up there that some devices have large variance with these movements across the device. That's mainly due to whether that sensor is directly above an LED or if it is in between an LED. So we do like to average these measurements at the end, just to kind of get more encompassing view of what it looks like across the device. Then you can just see we compared the top and bottom canopy just to see if the top of your body would get more treatment than the back of your body.
I'll just add a quick comment on that last one, Mark. So if you look at the graph, like how spiky the that top graph is, that was the arc LED. Where that's coming from is Novathor has a diffusion panel that James can talk about a lot better than we can, but basically that, like, you have these individual LEDs that obviously are have a lot more perpendicular photons coming out, but a diffusion panel will actually help that diffusion and get it more kind of even. So that's where you see this, some of those are even, whereas the arc LED doesn't have that. So it's a lot more of the just like individual LEDs. And the other thing to mention is Margaret very meticulously, when she did these measurements, thousands and thousands of measurements, actually had a blackout curtain on one of the panels while measuring the other one. So these numbers are a tiny bit lower than some of the other ones because there's a lot of reflection. So when she shows the body measurements, you'll kind of see that. So sorry, Margaret, go for it.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And one of the big things with all of these different pieces of data that we collected is we then wanted to take these data and say, what does that mean for a patient? So looking at this graph, those spikes and troughs, it's kind of daunting that the treatment could be all over the place like that. So then we looked at that in a patient context. So we put people into this bed that doesn't have that diffusion panel and sees that variance in irradiance and had them put the sensor on their chest, their torso, their head, their legs, so on and so forth, and saw what treatment looked like. Was it as variable for a person? And we saw that it wasn't, that it was pretty consistent when you backed away and weren't directly on top of those LEDs. So we want to look at it from a point of every researcher can get this measurement, and also when we put this into the practical application world, does it mean anything? So having both those data points is very important to us. Same thing over here, looking at that shoulder to shoulder measurement. Again, those troughs you're seeing here is where those panels connect, so there's just no LEDs there, kind of the measurements we'd expect to see, but seeing a lot of consistency between top to bottom and shoulder to shoulder, what we would hope and expect to see. And then one final thing we wanted to look at was the irradiance over a session. Was there any decay when you're laying in that bed, especially when we want to come up with a prescription for how long you should be laying in these full body treatments? If your treatment dropped off after 10 minutes, you're getting half the irradiance value, we would probably tell you to pop out of the bed then. But when we actually measured devices, irradiance stayed pretty consistent throughout the entire thing. So for the amount of time that is currently recommended, which could be up to 20 or 30 minutes, you're going to get the same treatment at the start and end of your treatment. Now, on the screen, we have our average measurement, which is all of our measurements combined, and then the reported measurements by the company. Now, you're going to see a little bit of variance between these two numbers. Again, we are absolutely not saying that the manufacturers are publishing anything that's incorrect. When we take these measurements, like Josh said, we block it out with a blackout curtain, and then we put that sensor in there. The reason we do that is because these are acrylic panels, so there is a lot of reflection between the two panels. So the opacity of the panels, the angles of the panels, all of these things matter for what that sensor is going to pick up when you put it in the bed. So I want a measurement that I can give, or I can recommend you take with your device that is going to be consistent. When I say this one is producing 23 milliwatts per centimeter squared, you can tell me what you got in your device, and I know exactly what you're looking at. I know that it's not a result of reflection angle, how much you had the bed close, was the sensor tilted, all of these different things. It's just kind of giving us an easy, more standard measurement to compare these devices in a research setting. Now, when we're talking about the patient setting, I'll get into that in a second. That's a different recommendation for how you take those measurements. But I can put the sensor in there and replicate all of these companies' measurements with that bouncing back and forth. We got 30 milliwatts. We even recreated it with Novathor on a call, the way we did it and the way they did it, and they saw the same thing in their beds, which is really what we're looking for, is an open door with other PBM scientists to kind of compare our measurements and see which methodology might be the best going forward. Now with the Theralite, you're going to see a huge difference between those measurements. That is because they used a different sensor. They used a thermopile sensor, which, like I said earlier, is looking at temperature. If you've ever done PBM, you know those devices get extremely hot. So thermopile might not be what we would recommend you use, and that's why we're seeing a huge difference in those numbers. And I think that's just the perfect example of why it's so important that we have standardized methodology to measure these devices. And as practitioners, you want to know what you're getting when you're buying these devices, or researchers, you want to know what you're working with. All right, then this is that practical applied part of our PBM measurements. So we had various participants go in there, different sexes, different body types, and had them hold the sensor on their head, shoulder, chest, groin area, legs, and then all the way down to their ankles. Then we took all those measurements and averaged them to figure out what treatment would look like for a person, because you are going to get some of that reflection between the two panels, where you're going to lose out on some of it that's being absorbed by your back or absorbed by your front. So what does that all come to and culminate to? We got, oops, sorry, it's blocking out there. There we go. So we got pretty consistent measurements across the body. Now, with how far you are from the top of the canopy, it's not surprising that we're going to see a little bit of variance here. But when you're averaging this out, this came out to almost exactly 30 milliwatts per centimeter squared, which is what Novathor was reporting. So they're looking at that patient outcome when they report that number. That's what we would think most people would want to see when they're looking at their devices. We just want to give the methodology to do so. And you can see kind of on that picture, little bit of variance, but not something we would expect to be statistically significant. And we also see when people lay down in the bed, they're laying down in slightly different areas, which is why we had all of those measurements repeated to average it out better. Right, and then there's all those numbers together. And then I'll just go really quickly through some of the other devices. Again, the spectral measurements for the wearable devices pretty aligned with what the manufacturers are reporting. So when you're testing those wavelengths, you know what you're getting. Then when it comes to those irradiance measurements, there's a little bit of variability between what's reported and what we're collecting. Again, it's just the methodology isn't public, so we don't know what those companies are doing. But still, even with those small wearable devices, they pack a punch. So you're getting a lot less treatment area, but you are still getting PBM treatment. A future investigation will look to how comparable that is with a full body treatment, or how many sessions you would have to do with these smaller devices to equal full body treatment. Same thing with those panel-based devices, looking at the wavelengths that they reported. And we did miss out on one of the wavelengths on here just because that was as far as our sensor could measure. It couldn't measure quite up into that range, but you can see the peaks start a little bit, so we would expect it to be right around there, but I can't confirm that. Alrighty, one really interesting thing that came from our study was finding out what treatment looked like with these panel-based devices. A lot of times recommendations with these devices is you can set it up in a room, you can get ready in front of it, you can work out in front of it, and you're getting a full body PBM treatment. As you can see from the picture I have up there, that's not necessarily true. That treatment only goes so far. They have recommended treatment distances, and you can see when we did measurements in an XYZ plane, we averaged those out, and you get a little bit decay as you go backwards, but then when you get past their recommended treatment distance, you're almost dropping to 0. And also, if you get outside of the range of the device, it's about the size of those those reddish marks. So when you get outside the range of the device, you're also almost getting no treatment. So that might just need to change the recommendations with these panel-based devices.
Yeah, I think I was a little surprised by just gut feel. I thought like a 110 volt panel based device wasn't going to give nearly the power output as a 220 volt bed. But then thinking about it, it's way less LEDs. But we think about it from a perspective of, okay, you are getting a decent irradiance, but how long would it take you to actually get a whole body treatment with a panel device? Because you'd have to stand there for 20 minutes and then move it, so you're standing there for like probably a couple hours compared to what you get in a 20-minute session in a bed.
Yep, exactly. And we saw the same thing when we took a bigger panel. You're seeing a larger treatment area, but that's just reflective of how large the device itself is. So again, still getting a very reasonable dosage with the area that is receiving treatment, but it is just a much smaller area than we expected when we went into testing those devices. And then same thing, tested it throughout a session, saw consistency for those 20 minutes that we tested. All right, and then I will get into our clinical trial that we have going on right now. So we are comparing 2 of those 3 beds that we studied. We are looking at the Novathor and the ARC LED. Our hypotheses were, number 1, does PBM have any effect in our participants' well-being? So we're looking at anti-inflammatory markers, overall wellness, sleep, all of these lovely things, as well as comparing the 2 beds when we're looking at a higher powered bed and a lower powered bed. I'm sure as people who have worked with PBM, you've seen the dosage of lasers, so we try not to say high power and low power because the differences are very minute when we're looking at these full body beds. But that is a secondary analysis we're looking at. So our condition for these participants, every participant is going to be their own control. So we're comparing them against themselves. So they will have 1 week where they're not doing anything. They come in, I get a blood draw from them and a saliva sample, and then I have them do subjective surveys throughout the entire week. Then for the next 3 weeks, they're receiving treatment or sham treatment 3 times a week for 3 weeks. So they'll come in, they get a 20-minute treatment. I'll get a saliva sample before they come in, and surveys afterwards to see how they feel, and then also a morning and an evening survey every single day throughout those 3-week blocks. Then we'll repeat that 4-week block, just swapping them to the other condition. So if they did active treatment, they will now get sham treatment. If they did sham treatment first, they'll then get active treatment. And then we'll compare how they feel. Our blinding condition has done really well. People have guessed accurately about 50% of the time, which is what we would expect. With a blinding condition, I've had people in the sham condition come out swearing up and down that they're in the active condition and vice versa. So very interesting stuff there. I'll talk a little bit about what the data we're getting from this is. So first thing we wanted to look at was subjective data. Like Josh was talking about, with a lot of these wellness interventions, we get a ton of amazing verbal feedback. People come out of these various modalities saying, I feel better, I sleep better, I'm training better, all of these lovely things. So we wanted a way to capture that. So we're making sure we're getting history on these participants so we can figure out responders, non-responders. Is there something in medical history or demographics that might give us some insight there? And then weekly, we're looking at those measurements that we get from verbal attestations. So we're looking at sleep quality, pain scales, fatigue scales, and just other wellness measurements. Treatment days, we're collecting a lot of data that we'll use for relevant analyses. How did you feel on that day? Have you had any injuries, soreness, anything that happened during the treatment that might be abnormal? That's mostly what those questions entail. And then we also wanted some objective data because blood, saliva, and heart rate don't lie. We need something to back up all of that anecdotal stories that we already have. So we are getting blood samples at the beginning and end of all of those treatment blocks I talked about. So at the beginning of that washout week, beginning of the treatment week, and the end of that treatment week. And then doing the same thing one more time with that second block. And these are all the markers we're looking at. Again, mostly inflammatory, anti-inflammatory. As we're moving forward with our recovery studies, we are starting to look a little bit more into the neurocognitive realm, with some biomarkers that we're working with an adjacent team on. Then same thing with saliva, again, mostly inflammatory, anti-inflammatory. Get there for a second. Then another piece of objective data, we have our participants wear an Oura ring. So this is going to give us heart rate throughout the day, throughout the night. We're also getting a ton of sleep data from that. So how much are they sleeping, quality of their sleep. We don't use that variable as much, but it's great to be able to have access to those data. And then the Polar H10 is a heart rate monitor that they wear during their treatment. So we can see kind of what's happening while they're laying for that 20-minute treatment. And another great thing with our participant population, we're pulling from what's known as the Strong Lab at the Air Force Research Laboratory. Sure, we know with clinical trials, one of the hardest things with wellness studies is you put somebody in a study and tell them you're doing something to improve their health, they make a million other changes to their life. Then it's really, really hard to go back and say, it was my intervention that made their life better, it's my intervention that did X, Y, and Z. Our Strong Lab population is controlled for the amount of exercise they're doing, their diet, nutrition, training, all of these amazing things. They're also a very similar population in what their careers look like, their expectations look like, their cognitive load looks like. So when we're adding this intervention on top, we can be pretty confident that if we're seeing results, I can track that back to PBM or whatever I'm studying rather than various life changes that come with wellness interventions. And that was just about everything I had, but I will go back to the study design because I think that's probably where the most questions will be.
Awesome. Yeah, appreciate everybody's time. Love to grab some questions, but yeah, hopefully this gave you a good overview on kind of what we're building from the recovery science side all the way to very specifics in photobiomodulation. But we're excited about where these studies are going and lots more to be done. So love to take some questions, or feel free to email us afterwards too.
Thank you so much, Josh and Margaret. You can stop sharing if you want, and we can get questions. Anyone who wants to start?
Yes, Paolo. So how long is that study running for? When do we see some results?
We are hoping to have an N of 40 by June.
Okay.
About
Right.
halfway through, right?
Yes, correct. Just over halfway.
Right. Cool. That's fascinating. It's going to be interesting. Interesting to hear what you said about, put somebody in a wellness study. And this is I know there's another study, nothing related to yours, study on exercise, but it was done with cleaners in a hotel, and you tell one group that they're just being monitored for the amount of activity they do. You tell the other group that they are being that they believe that hotel sort of people making beds and cleaning and that kind of thing, that the exercise is good for them. They want to monitor that exercise and how they're doing. And of course, the people told they're in a sort of like a health related study and how good it is for them, of course, have came out of the study feeling much better. And it's just interesting. Tell them what kind of study they're in and they conform.
Yeah, I had a comment. It's interesting this whole body approach and looking at the parameters. If you do, about 28 milliwatt per square centimeter, the whole head for 20 minutes, 3 times per week. That's a transcranial PBM in itself. So it is really whole body. So you're really testing the two type of intervention compared to some of those other devices that were mostly systemic. And it's really interesting, very curious to see your results. So that's a comment right there. And then I was curious about the anecdotal benefits the information you got from the command center. What was kind of their experience, if okay to share?
Yeah. A lot of it is energy enhancement. They're all like in pain a lot, like musculoskeletal pain. So we just get lots of reduction in chronic pain. We've had stories of, I sound like an infomercial, but like stories of migraines, like chronic migraines just gone. Some guys with some pretty like serious disease conditions that like symptoms way better. So it's across the board. But I think the thing, energy is one of the big things of like, I feel better. I feel looser. I feel more energized.
And was that motivation in terms of kind of they feel like they can do more stuff, or was it energy in terms of energy that can expand, with physical activity and
I think one and the same, I think is kind of what we hear. And that's my own personal experience too. I'm pretty biased, but like I always feel like I just get this nice general increase in energy the next few hours. And our athletes kind of say the same thing is like, I feel like I've got more energy heading into practice.
right? Kazayun, the question?
Hello, do you have my voice?
We do.
Yep.
Yes. Hello, thank you for your study. It's very interesting. And I think this kind of well-being devices can be used for patients who suffer from some kind of pain or stiffness. For example, regardless of the underlying disorder, just the patients with, for example, spondylitis, ankylosing, and rheumatoid arthritis, and some kind of chronic pain and stiffness. And I have a very good experience in this field because about 15 years ago, I used PBM. I used PBM in my office for a patient with spondylitis, ankylosing, and he was very surprised when the session was ended. He told me that I don't have stiffness. My low back pain, my chronic low back pain is better, is very improved. And I think this kind of device can be used for these kind of patients. For example, chronic pain, neuropathies, or stiffness, joint stiffness. It's very interesting. Thank you. Thank you for your sharing your
I agree
experience.
100%. I couldn't agree more. Like one of my hopes is to get this into like a chronic pain treatment center or get it in with some clinical folks.
Yes, very
Nice.
nice.
Absolutely. One of my favorite takeaways from the study so far is a participant who came back after finishing the study and was complaining about soreness and muscle aches and said, I wish I was still in the study. I would feel so much better. So, and she didn't really know even what she was saying, which was why I was like, that's really interesting. And I did put her in PBM. She said she felt better.
Thank you.
Haldi, next.
Hello, can you all hear me?
We can.
Yeah, it is really great, Josh and Margaret. I really appreciate your presentation and the very rigorous scientific study in terms of the design and particularly for power measurement. I mean, again, we have had the situations in terms of how to accurately measure the irradiance or using different power meters or anything like that. So I guess you have not published anything in terms of the details of those measurements, correct?
Yes, so we have two papers in the works right now. One will be the actual data that we pulled from this methodology. The second will be for these three categories of devices, exactly what sensors we recommend, what sort of specifications they need to have, like validated, like it being validated to a light source that could be across multiple devices, across multiple companies, what other sort of range specifications it needs to have, and then when you're actually measuring the devices, what are the important things to capture and how to capture it. So we will have that coming out hopefully within the year.
I will contact either of you or both of you for more details in terms of discussions. Another thing I want to mention is really James had helped us back to really years ago. We did some quick measurement using this broadband near-infrared spectroscopy with Gonzalez Lima. Again, that's 7-8 some years ago, and it was showing cytochrome C oxidate change during the irradiation. But then because of IRB issue at the time, we could not publish the results for that. Sorry. So back to, I guess, Josh, you were talking about Air Force or some kind of funding. I really have a possibility to develop small sensors that you can put into different locations during the irradiation. I mean, during the PBM treatment, so you can monitor, or we can monitor cytochrome C oxidate related changes for physiological measurement. So this is why I'm thinking I can talk to you offline for more details, and then maybe some fundings, which should be not too expensive, but then that can be going along with your whole body study or anything like that. So I really appreciate your, yeah.
I love that. Yeah, please send us a note.
You. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And Marnie?
Fine, thank you. What a wonderful talk, and I love your study design. It's great. And I do have a question about potential for testing. I'm not sure. I just saw on your slide it was post-testing, and I assume that's a few days or a week after the final treatment. And have you looked into post-testing 1 month later, 3 months later, 6 months later? I know you mentioned a patient came back and she said, oh, I don't feel so, my pain's coming back. And I was wondering how long post that final treatment was. And are you planning to do post-testing longer out?
You take that, Margaret?
Yes, anybody can answer the question, either Margaret.
Oh, sorry, other Margaret, sorry.
Oh, yeah, I'm a Margaret. People call me Marnie, but that's not important right now. Never mind. Yes, I was.
With
I
our
meant Margaret, the investigator here. Sorry.
Oh, no, you're fine. With our future recovery studies, we want to look at pre and post session. So we'll be looking at immediately before and immediately after to see kind of those effects there. We're also looking at 5 to 6 minutes afterwards, because that's generally when the scientific opinion is that those biomarkers would fall off for some sort of immediate acute effect. So we want to look at that. And then we're also going to treat throughout that washout period at the end. So we'll be able to compare them. If they had the active treatment first, what they look like at the end of their washout period. We do have some studies that we'd love to look at 3-6 months out. It's just you tend to get a little bit of a decay with your sample there. So we don't know if we'll have the end to have some sort of statistical significance, but that is absolutely something we're interested in.
And I would just suggest that you would, if you can get it into whatever study you're doing, yes, you want to sort of soon after for cognitive studies, we don't really like to test cognition right away after that last treatment, if real or sham, whatever you want, because if it was real, they might be sleepy. So we do suggest waiting a few days. Anyway, but then I think getting data at 1 month and 2 months later is very important if you can do it. I know we found that very important with our football players who met NIH criteria for possible CTE. And yeah, they looked great at 1 week after the last treatment, and they all got real. It was open protocol. They looked great at 1 month after the last treatment, but boy, did those football players fall off 2 months later. Now, fortunately, they could go back and put on their own V-Lite head frame device, treat default mode network. And after 3 months of that, it came back up to even before any of our previous success time post treatment data. So that's all. I just wanted to encourage you to do some longer term follow-up. It would be helpful.
Yeah, that'd be great. Appreciate it.
We have only a
Thank you.
few minutes left. And Marty, we have 4 minutes total.
It's actually great to see you guys because I was in a biomedical engineering program at Ohio State back in the mid 70s, so ancient history. But
Bucks.
as a double E, yeah, it's just so cool to see you guys. As a double E, I really appreciate your very detailed comparison across devices. And because there's so many devices out there, and as you note, the specs are not intentionally misquoted, but due to various methods of testing, effectively they are. I did want to point out that the peak wavelengths that you reported are probably well within the manufacturer's tolerance ranges. But my question actually is, especially since you mentioned the amount of time that people can spend, say, in front of a panel or in a bed, have you considered mounting devices so that people can receive PBM while they're sleeping? And if I'm correct, I remember, I think one paper published where they showed some improvement in the glymphatic system performance, or maybe that was a hypothesis. And then the other question, the related question is, could you conceive of some sort of feedback based on perhaps detected body motion, or if you could get wireless data from, say, an Oura Ring to modulate the photobiomodulation irradiance during sleep?
Are you thinking neurally focused or bigger parts of the body?
However you could get the feedback. Actually, I thought about this for my mom. She's 98 years old, and the idea is to even just passively monitor motion.
Mm-hmm.
I know you can also passively monitor heart rate, but any sort of feedback that you could design to do a study like that, because here's a situation where you could get a closed loop system to optimize some parameters, some target parameters during sleep, which would minimize the amount of time people spend during the day, but also give you a nice closed loop period, maybe over 6, 7, 8 hours, where you could get a tremendous amount of data and do some real potentially interesting optimization.
Yeah, I would love that. I think that's fascinating, and I hope that's where this goes. We're super intrigued in any ways that we can optimize sleep and optimize time. This is not PBM, but there are some neat devices now, head-worn, that do neurofeedback, like combine sleep monitoring and neurostimulation. So, but very, very interested in all those ideas. That'd be great.
I think could I send you an email, because I have some further ideas along those lines.
Absolutely. Yep. Our emails are in the chat, so I'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, I copied them down.
Cool.
Great.
Awesome.
Wow, so many ideas. We got new studies going forward, so it's amazing. Excellent. I guess on the fly, is there a possibility also to have irradiances that are slightly higher than the range 25 to 40 milliwatt per square centimeter and decreasing the exposure time? I don't know, Josh and Margaret, would we get the same benefits in a shorter time or not necessarily?
That's why we have that kind of secondary analysis between the lower and higher power beds, is because we're very interested in that, especially with the populations we work with. It's hard to get them to give us time. So the less time we can take up for them, probably the more interested and more likely they will be to use it and continue using it. So if we could increase that dosage over a smaller amount of time, that would definitely be interesting. But that is where most devices sit. Generally, it's the power input. James, you can probably, I learned this from James, is the power input of the device. So you can crank it up on a lot of these devices. It's just, this is kind of the range that low light level therapy has sat at.
And the exposure time so was shorter when the power was higher in
There
your
are,
study?
so the time in our study is exactly the same, so we can compare across the lower power and the higher power. But there are a lot of like high-powered lasers using the same wavelengths that will do it for a shorter amount of time, like a 5-10 minute treatment.
Right.
But that's generally a targeted treatment.
Thank you.
And then I saw a question about the papers. We do have some stuff that we already have cleared to release. So if anybody wants that, feel free to email Josh and I. Oh, he already got that. Perfect.
Oh, yeah, so we'll send that to Paulo. We'll send you the poster and then you can
Sure.
send it to everybody.
Absolutely. Thank you all. We're out of time. Thank you, Margaret and Josh. It was fascinating and to be continued. Take care.
Thanks so much.
everybody. Appreciate it.
I see you.